Welcome to the Rocket School, everybody. And our Acceleration Consortium talk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alfie Goldfarb. I'm with the IC Acceleration Consortium. Nice to see a few familiar faces. May not always be part of this community, well, school and TUT. I'm thrilled to have Erin Scott here to talk about strategy for startups. So Erin is brief bio, I guess. So she's a biomedical engineer by training, and now an economist. And she's PhD's from MIT. Then she went to NUS for a few years as a professor. Back at MIT for a while. We are trying to recruit here to be part of the Acceleration Consortium. That is so be kind. But intellectually engaging and exciting, and all those other things. And she's a leading scholar in thinking about entrepreneurial strategy, especially in the context of science-based startups. And so it's a perfect fit for our seminar, the Acceleration Consortium, thinking about strategy for startups.
Thank you. And thank you all. I really appreciate it and joining you guys. And it's just really, I think that kind of captures my own journey. I think it captures as well kind of the mission of why we're all here. As Avi mentioned, I started my career as a biomedical engineer. And a big part of that was spinning technologies out of WashU Medical School and WashU Engineering School. And, I had to learn the lesson that I think every engineer has to learn at some point, that getting the technology right is only a small part of getting it in the world. And it was a hard lesson because, we'd fund the startups, we'd build them great teams. They were just incredible technologies with incredible scientists behind them. And then, a lot of hard work. And then sometimes, it wouldn't really translate. And that would be a failed startup. A lot of time and investment by the researchers where they could have been doing other things. And then even, sometimes that technology or that class of technologies would be stunted for a while because people mixed, the implications and the promise of the technology with some of the challenges of just commercialization. And so that's what led me to really shift my career and really focus on how can we think about enabling entrepreneurs and innovators and scientists to get their ideas into the world to make impact. And, really what excites me about Acceleration Consortium is this is the mission, is we are doing cool science, or y'all are doing very cool science that is at the frontier of science, but it is also for moving it into the world to have really, dramatic impact in as we move forward. And so as I kind of wanted to start, I'm going to use a lot of examples, and I decided to use examples that were a little bit different from maybe where we're kind of core sitting, because I think that I think that helps us kind of see the principles here and the frameworks when we're not necessarily with our own biases about how we might commercialize our own technologies. But I wanted to start with an example that actually, it was funny because when I was here last in the fall, I visited one of the labs. And it was just like this transformative moment where I was like, this is very cool. I understand there's so much promise and excitement, but it was also just really darn cool. And I was thinking of an example for where we could kind of start this discussion where I had that same feeling of this is super cool and this could create so much impact in the world. And so I wanted to start with one of my colleagues, some of you may know, Dina Katabi. And Dina Katabi's lab does a lot of very cool things. And one of the cool things is this Wi-Fi technology. And the idea is that you can kind of see through walls using kind of Wi-Fi. Very cool, very interesting. But I think the best way to describe it is I'm going to show a movie. I'm not going to play the audio, which is just some cool elevator music, in part because it's kind of messing up the nice system that we have all running together. But I wanted you to show it. And as you watch it, I want you to kind of think about, what would be your advice? Okay, this is pretty cool, but we're not here just to do cool things. We're here to move things into the world. And so how would you think about moving that impact to the world? Let's see if we can get it. Here, right, is that using the Wi-Fi signals, you can see people and their movements through the walls. can see their breathing, you can see their heart rate, just a lot of very, this is the early stage. You should view this as about 10 years ago.
Here.
Pulse, you can see distinguish between different people, you can see subtle shifts in their movement. Just a lot catching, even in that early stage kind of version of it, quite a bit going on. And so, some people see that and they're like, that's a little scary. And absolutely, I kind of get that sense is like, oh, we can just now see our neighbors in a whole new way. But there's, a lot of, over here, a lot of also kind of promise of thinking about how we might move this technology forward, right? Just like many of you have something that is very cool and people see a lot of different futures. And so you're wrestling with these choices as you move forward. Like, how might we create value? Like, it's kind of scary, but there's also a lot of promise here. And so the discussion starts to be, what are the applications we should use? There's just an array of possibilities here. Which customers should we serve? Who should we focus on first? Should I commercialize the technology at that pretty primitive level of performance that was still pretty awesome? Or should I keep kind of investing in the underlying research with the premise that in 5, 10 years at that new level of performance, which is uncertain, I then may commercialize it? And then if I decide to commit to pushing that technology forward, which metrics matter? Because those different applications we might think about, actually different kind of metrics about the subtlety of the movement, the breathing metrics that we catch, the heart rate, the variability, those different metrics are going to matter differently. So which direction should I even push the technology is the question. And then how should I align that technology strategy with our commercialization strategy? And should I engage corporate partners? And also when and how? What are the trade-offs of engaging them and with whom? And so, this is what my work is about. This is the challenge of entrepreneurship, is that, entrepreneurship is not only about coming up with great ideas. And I'm certainly not going to sit in this room full of, scientists at the frontier and say that innovation is not about ideas. It is absolutely about having good ideas, but it is also about choosing a way to implement that in a way that creates and captures value. I think you see that in kind of how Dina Katabi, just in our questions of how we think about how we might move that incredible technology forward. And so, for her, you probably, even as you watch that video, you're very quickly seeing a lot of different, without even reading the papers and understanding the science, in a deep way, we very quickly can see a number of different paths forward for how she might commercialize this technology. And so, one thing that she did, and many a scientist or entrepreneur does this, is to say, okay, I have this great technology, but I'm in my wheelhouse in technology. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to people that specialize in commercialization. I'm going to talk to VCs. I'm going to talk to scientists that have commercialized before, and I'm going to get some opinions about the direction that I should go forward. And we could see that same process with this technology. And some, and there were many ideas, but here are kind of some common ones. One is, Dina, you're an exceptional scientist. Stay in your wheelhouse. Really push this forward with the idea that this general technology could really be specialized for applications for police or intelligence or the military applications. But really kind of specialize on the technology, and then let others really map that. Another was saying, wow, this breathing component, this movement component, there's a lot that's really interesting here. And maybe if you partner with healthcare providers or pharmaceutical companies, really work with them, you could allow them to create a lot more value for their customers, either in medical trials or in hospital settings, or really working together with them collaboratively to push that forward. Another route was saying, actually, why don't we just start hiring our team? And why don't we think really about building out of this technology to disrupt the home security and monitoring market. You know, people want videos and to monitor their place, but they don't actually want, you know, the video always monitoring them. And so there's a way, you know, we might think about really disrupting that to move that forward, building a company to do that. And then another one was like, why are you to limit how the world is going to use this really cool technology? What you should focus your time on is building a platform that really allows others to build out these applications. So whether that be homeowners, techies, you know, just everyone thinking about that they could leverage that, and you're just this aggregator of building the common form and platform. And you know, the list went on. Every person that she talked to had a different vision of this technology and the company behind it. And so the challenge is, you know, each of these suggestions involve not only different versions of success, of what success looked like for her, but in the short term, in the next 6 months, 18 months, it involved different priorities about what tests she should be doing, how she should be moving the technology forward, who she should be hiring, and who she should be talking with about partners and collaborators. And so that's kind of this challenge for entrepreneurs and innovators is, where do we get going now when the future is kind of uncertain and we have a lot of different options? You know, how can we make choices to accelerate when confronting options and a high level of uncertainty? And so this is what entrepreneurial strategy is about. This is what my research and practice is about, as well as my work with Scott Stern at MIT and Joshua Gans here at Rodman, as well as many others, which is, you know, it's about how do we choose among alternative paths for an idea and the company that we use to move that idea into the world. And this is a growing community of academic researchers doing classical, theoretical, and empirical work, as well as building out practitioner tools and, you know, my burgeoning YouTube career. I don't think I'm going to retire off of that, but really building out a set of tools that build the research and move it out into the world. And in particular, Joshua and Scott and I are very excited that in a few months we have a book coming out that really focuses on this. And as we like to say, you know, it's a 500, 600-page book, but it comes down to just 3 basic principles, with just a few different words. The first is that choice matters. That as innovators and entrepreneurs, our choices matter, our early choices matter. The second, that while there is a lot of choices that you guys have to navigate, there are 4 that are fundamentally important. Which customer are you going to serve? How are you going to innovate? How are you going to push your technology forward? How are you going to structure that? Your organization, so what co-founders, what collaborators, what core capabilities are you going to build? And then with whom and how are you going to compete? And then last, these choices matter together. Of course, how we define the technology and push it forward is going to intersect our choice of which customer we're going to serve. If she decides to go after the home security matter, different technology metrics matter versus going to pharmaceutical companies and working collaboratively with them. And so this kind of I'm going to do today is kind of present just a high level overview of what these different tools are and bring them together into a playbook. Each of them, happy to go into depth. Underlying them is a lot of theoretical and empirical research, as well as detailed playbooks. And the first, you know, I don't want to spend too much time here, but I do want to help us understand why choice matters, right? Dina Katabi cannot do everything, right? She's she's a MacArthur scholar, she has a lot of resources, but there's only so much, you know, she still has 24 hours in a day. And, you know, there's only so much, you know, her team can do, even with a pretty large team. And so even with the 4 applications that I kind of highlighted, but imagine that there are many more that she's considering, she has to focus. And so there's just a limit on time, but there's also that some choices to move in one direction, hire certain people, have certain collaborators, move you in one direction that are actually going to foreclose other options. And that's different from what we think about if you're a really large company. And so I wanted to think about what this looks like. So first is to think about the entrepreneur and their idea center stage here. And now notice we have the filament is a DNA. That took like a few days of thought, and we're very proud of that image. Just in case you think it's all seriousness here. And the idea is like, okay, should I just go for this blue strategy? Like, should I just decide, I'm all about disrupting home security and just go full gusto? And I go to the VC and I'm like, write me a check. And probably the VC, even though probably like for your U of T buds, you're like, of course. But me from MIT, you're like, maybe you should do an experiment. You're like, not gonna give me the $100 million. But you might give me like 500K or 250K and say, do an experiment. And then when that experiment comes back, the evidence from that experiment comes back, then you might give me more and say, oh yeah, this seems to move forward, right? And we know what this is. This is this investment approach. This is this staged investments, or kind of at these different milestones, you make yes or no decisions to continue to invest, and others may come on. And this makes sense from your perspective. But one challenge of this for us as entrepreneurs and innovators is actually the little experiments I do to move to that blue strategy are in fact commitments. I start hiring people. I start moving the technology into one direction, not the other. I start architecting it in a certain structure that leaves others behind. And so while his day, I'm picking on the VC in the room, while his day is probably okay if he decides, oh, that experiment didn't work out on investing in them, that's okay. I double down on my other investments that didn't pan out. For us as an entrepreneur, now we've moved down that blue path. And people say, well, just pivot. That's what entrepreneurs, they do. They just switch. But one challenge is that for some choices, moving down the blue path may actually make moving to the red path unviable. You've shared the technology with a certain partner, you've moved it in a certain direction, you've hired a team, you've turned down other partnerships to work with certain people. And so this challenge of choice then is incredibly important at that early stage. But again, that makes it really complex because there's a lot of uncertainty that we have in the earliest stages of how do we move that forward. This isn't to say every experiment is a one way, but there are many that can move you in one direction. And so, what are the types of dimensions that we can think about with respect to these core dimensions of choice? Which customer are you going to serve? How are you going to move your technology forward? Your organization, your competition. I'm just going to highlight these briefly so we can have more time to go through the playbooks. But this principle of you making choices around this and moving in one direction and starting to make commitments is going to be there for each of these. We have a lot of tools and kind of frameworks and thinking about how these structures and what are those commitments as you move forward. The first I want to highlight for choice of customer is, we're bad at choosing customers. Now, first people say, wait a second, Erin, you get to choose your customer? Does your customer have to choose you? You have to create value for your customer. Otherwise they move on. I say, yeah, but just like we saw with Dina's, there's a lot of different customers she could choose. So not only does she need to create value for them, but she also gets to decide which one she wants to serve. And yet we tend to be pretty bad about this. Because we don't want to go all in on one, we want to maybe try to serve everyone. And you can think of many technologies where they tried to fit everyone's different demands, and then they didn't serve anyone's. And I could have shown something like that, but I love this one instead, which is this Prax healing ointment for man and beast. And if you're serving grandpa and his horse, you probably haven't picked a customer. And we all laugh at the image, and yet we've all been in meetings where we're like, do we go push the technology in this direction? Do we build it out? Do we collaborate with this? Well, we also say, let's also do this. And then we hit that middle ground where we haven't done either. And so I hope when you find yourself in that next meeting, you'll think of this image. But it's also kind of hard because of those early stage choices actually shape how you move forward. Right? Like deciding to serve this customer might allow me to move to certain follow-on customers, but it also might close the possibility of later serving other customers. And I'll leave the horse and grandpa dynamics to those deeper in marketing. But let's think about what this looks like with another technology venture. The 23andMe. It came out of the Human Genome Project, right, where we saw that sequencing was improving in speed and lowering in cost. a lot of different, innovations came out of just really seeing that trajectory. And, the team for 23andMe at the earliest stages saw that this technology was pretty exciting. And then in particular, it really related to something they cared about a lot, which is, could we think about healthcare being more focused on preventative rather than kind of ex post care after you're already sick, providing care. But very quickly on, they saw that there were two different opportunities for them to focus their attention on in the early days. One was kind of this classical working with physicians, the FDA, to enhance prenatal screening. Many different ventures went this route. And you can imagine that kind of the classical route that you might have thought to go through, and then very successful. Another route, was to in fact focus on just going direct to the consumer. And you can think, if particularly you think you really want to get this information into consumers' hands so that they can make choices, you think that might be great. But then but because there are some regulations about just telling, patients all this information, you might actually start the venture focusing on like weird, like, oh, if you eat asparagus, you might smell your pee differently. You can save that for your next cocktail party, right? Good at that, or, genetic ancestry histories and whatnot. And, we can all kind of see what these are. But there's also kind of this dimension that actually this early choice shapes how the company might go forward. So on one dimension, if this is your first product, you are going to build a team that's more focused on customer experience, on ancestry, on genetics, in these applications. And then your next product is going to be similar in that vein. And next thing down the road, that's what you're going to be, is a company that really focuses on that. Whereas if you're in this space, you're hiring not only folks that are in genetics, but those that are physicians, those that understand regulatory pathways. And you might focus on, one subset of genetic conditions and then slowly kind of expand. And that's a different evolution of the company, of the capabilities you build and how you move it forward. There's even like one layer kind of added complexity here is just this idea of, in fact, the people that you might work with over here really aren't excited about this. Go back and kind of read the articles of the time. They basically say, Dr. Google is already causing me headaches. And now you're going to send patients a whole bunch of information about their genetics that, is at different stages of our understanding. And without kind of enough information for them to contextualize that information, that's inappropriate. That's risky. Very, very strong views at the time about whether patients should be given this information, particularly in situations where we then can't tell them how they should act on it. And so a choice to move in this direction actually would have implications, not just in that natural evolution of the team and the product that you would build, but also that these people would have strong views about whether they feel comfortable collaborating with you. There would be this kind of strategic commitment that would foreclose different options. And so that's kind of what we're thinking about with choice of customer, right? Is how can you think about those early stage choices, not just on who you're going to engage with first, but how that choice of who you engage with first is going to shape your other customers that you work with, and also which doors does that close. And so in particular, that this choice of early customer really shapes the evolution of the customers that you engage with, which mainstream market you will in fact win. And then so that's the choice of customer. And we can think of that. And there are some tests and structures and tools that we can do to understand those in advance and the ramifications, or build our priors about that. The next is thinking about the choice of technology. And here, I'm going to just go very kind of high level because we're going to see this more when I put them together. But a big part of this is already, as we've talked about with Dina, which direction do you want to move it? How do you want that to interface with others? And so, just kind of some of the ways that we might think about this. One is, are you going to explore the technology? Keep pushing that fundamental research to potentially unlock higher level of performance. Or should you exploit it at its current level of performance? Should you think about applications that you can solve the customer's problem today? And that's a different trade-off of attention, of time, of resources. So that one kind of dimension. The second is, do you focus on a modular solution that really can interface with a lot of different other systems? Or do you build it out as its own system? Those are a lot of subtle choices that you're going to have to make. And so kind of which direction. And then is it general or is it very specific to a certain application? So just at a high level, and I'm happy, afterwards to go into more detail, but just I want us to start to think about, just like customer, what are some of those choices that move us in one direction versus another? And we see this the same with organization. What team members are you recruiting? What resources and capabilities are you building? What kind of culture and leadership style? And then last is this choice of competition. And this is where I'm going to spend the rest of our time, as how do we think about bringing these together? And oftentimes people say, like, Erin, don't we want no competition? Isn't that the idea? Is not to have competition. And as far as I can tell, there's only one way to not have competition, which is what?
Not enter.
No, well, yeah, not enter. Not, yeah, conditional on playing the game. There's only one way not to have competition.
IP.
Even that, like we're all worried about our IP in part because it protects, it throws some elbows. But if
Building something nobody wants.
absolutely, thank you. If you build something no one wants, no one's coming for you. It's the safest way I figured out how not have competition. But if you build something that that was not seen before, we look at that idea that Dina had, which is pretty breathtaking. People are going to come for it. They may come with a different kind of technology solution. They may be more or less successful doing it at the same level of performance or the same level of reliability or cost, but they're coming for it if we prove that we can create value and that there's a solution here. But one thing that we can do as an entrepreneur is we can choose the nature of that competition. We can choose the game that we're going to play. We can choose with whom we're going to compete and the nature of that competition itself, which is a lot more freedom than the incumbents have. And so we want to kind of leverage that early on to think about how that shapes our other choices. And then use that to shape and actually make a choice as to, as an entrepreneur, what kind of competition do I want to be engaged in? And so these are the two options here. One is for a given idea, an entrepreneur chooses with whom to compete and how to compete. And so on this kind of x-axis, you can imagine orienting towards collaboration, working with our corporate partners, helping them enhance their value. So this is the idea of, Dina works with healthcare providers, really, side by side to think about how they might create more care for patients. Or she might really think about really specializing this, or really developing, pushing forward this technology in a general way, but then helping get it out in different military applications or other kind of helping other people move it into the world. On the other side of this is we could in fact focus on competition. We're like, forget, big security tech companies. We want to disrupt. We want to, in fact, go head to head with them. And so we're going to compete. On the y-axis, we can think about investing in control versus execution. Control, I'm going to really focus on protecting those patents that you talked about, really making sure I protect them, throw some elbows, and really own it. On the other dimension, really focus on learning with others, learning with our customer, learning with our partners to continue to innovate. And so you can think about this as a choice between competing with established firms versus competing to partner with established firms on one dimension. And it's a choice between focusing on establishing formal IP rights or focusing on kind of iterative collaborative innovation. Different dimensions. And one thing that I want to point out is that others kind of in thinking in innovation and entrepreneurship in the past have said, you're in this technology class or you're in this region, this is your playbook. You should be in this quadrant. But I want to show you that, you our light bulb and our DNA inside of it, you and your idea here are center stage. And then we find in our work, both kind of in the empirics, but also working with innovators, is that most entrepreneurs can actually see at least 3 different of these different paths forward. And that's what I'm going to kind of walk through is what do we mean here on these different paths? And so the first thing I want to focus on is this control versus execution. Because people are like, wait a second, when I think about innovation-driven entrepreneurship, I think I want to protect everything and I got to go like heck, like really get moving. But now I'm saying, wait a second, there's trade-offs. How can you do both? And I want to think of this as more like a spectrum. Are you going to be oriented more towards control? Or are you going to be oriented more towards execution? And this is one of my favorite examples. And I have kind of a dumb joke about it, which is this is the Steve Jobs of his day. It may not be funny, but I promise you'll get it in a second. So this is inside of it. It's like a golden delicious apple. I know in New England, in Boston, where I live, we're all about apples, like an insane level. I don't know if that's the same up here. And this guy, he didn't invent the golden delicious apple, but he kind of brought it to the world. And you know, he was going and moving it around the world, and then people would be like, "You're right, the golden delicious apple. It's it's like sliced bread. I never knew I wanted it. Now I do." But he ran into a problem that many of us worry about with our own innovations, which is that once people saw it was delicious, they could just go to his tree, cut a little sapling off, take it back home, and then they had their own golden delicious empire. And so how could he move this into the world and capture value from that idea if people could copy it or just take a slice? And so what he did is, as you can see here, is he built these cages around all of his trees and put bells on it. And I think there might be a gun that he's with, hired people to really protect it. And then so you can think of this as the Apple iOS. I promised it would make sense. I didn't promise it would be funny, right? And so the idea here, though, is all the time that he took and all the resources he focused on protecting that to make sure that I can't sneak in at night and cut a sapling off was time and attention and resources that was not about reaching customers. That was not about getting more apples into the world. And that is this trade-off between control versus execution. Both are important, but you have to really pick an orientation because there are trade-offs. And we can see the benefits of both. Control really allows us to capture value, but focusing on execution allows us to really learn and experiment. Maybe that's not the type of apple people want, and we can move forward in that, right? And so there's this kind of trade-off. One really allows us to really protect that idea, get a lot of value from it if it turns out it creates value for others. The others allow us to really iteratively build our solution to what people exactly want. This other dimension is collaborate versus compete. And so, this is, I would say, a dimension where people often say, wait a second, I think of entrepreneurship as more one or the other, which comes from our own prior experience. But kind of for the same idea, you can see both. And so one innovation that came out of MIT a few years back was this pill pack idea. And the idea was that, as patients, we're terrible about taking our medicines the way our physicians order them. And this is even more so if you have multiple medications, like those that are older or with chronic conditions, because those medications are given to you in bottles, not based on the time of day that you need to take them. And then if we could just get people to take their medications as they were prescribed, healthcare would be improved. And so these two came from the pharmacy industry. They really wanted to move this idea. And they came up with this system, both kind of the technology to do it and kind of the general idea, which is that instead of giving the technologies or the prescriptions in bottles, we could do it in little bags based on the time of day. This seems great. But they went around and they were talking with people, and everyone said, this is a good idea. It's not going to be your best idea, but it's a good way to start. And you should go to these pharmacies, big pharmacy company, and you should license out your idea to them. And you might get a little bit of a payday, and then they move this out to all of their customers. So it's conditional on them paying and conditional on them actually moving that into their systems. You could have really big impact. the folks were actually, this founder said, I'm worried that what's going to happen, one is it's going to take a long time to license. Because people won't, will they really see it? And then two, they might license it, but really, are they going to prioritize this and moving it forward? And so they said, wait a second, why don't we focus instead on thinking about what it would look like to compete? Now, they didn't jump in this realm right away. They just said, let's take a moment and consider this other pathway. Let's consider the red light bulb before we start moving to the blue light bulb. And very quickly they said, if we're going to build our own pharmacy company about this, which seems just crazy, right? I'm going to build a pharmacy company around these robots and machines. But they said, let's just do the thought exercise. Let's take a week or two and sketch out what that would look like. And really quickly they saw, that would be a very ambitious route, which would prioritize a lot of understanding regulations at different levels in the United States to really move this forward, and really thinking in a deep way about how this technology could be put at scale and building up their own manufacturing plants to do this. And once they had that, they said, in fact, our goal is to make sure this gets in the world, and we're happy to take on the risk of actually building it and committing to that uphill battle to move this. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how they thought about that in a moment. But it went from people saying, yeah, maybe you can move this, to something that when Amazon.com decided to move into the pharmaceuticals or pharmacy space, they actually saw it's actually pretty tough to do that. And they looked around and then they acquired PillPack for $1 billion. And the day they did that, the market cap of these other companies went down several $1 billion. That's creating value. But more so is like this innovation actually getting out into the world really helped a number of patients. And then they continue to do that. Right? And so you can see just as we walk through that, there are benefits of both. Collaboration allows you to really leverage your partner's resources, their knowledge, their know-how, their trust and their knowledge of their customer. At the same time, competition really allows you to think about a novel way to create value and really thinking about serving new customers in a way that really kind of, is closely aligned with kind of your idea. And so, both paths here make sense. And so we've seen this kind of at a high level, if we bring these together from those alternatives I talked about of Wi-Fi, right? Is really thinking about these different paths, these different orientations. And these, in fact, relate to the 4 different playbooks for strategies for startups. One is focusing on an intellectual property strategy, and I'll go through these in a moment. Focusing on collaborating, but heavily controlling. Opposite of that is a disruption strategy, focusing on competition and execution. Another strategy focusing on execution is a value chain strategy. Here we're thinking about enhancing the value of the existing companies and creating more value with their customers. Right? We talked about that with Wi-Fi. And then last is an architectural strategy where we're going to architect an entirely new value chain to serve new customers. And again, you and your idea here are center stage. And that for most ideas, we're able to see at least 3 different paths that you could build out and move your idea to the market. And so again, this first one is the intellectual property strategy. But folks in this room really understand this in a deep way. And thinking about the tools and those early choices, really about controlling this technology. The idea here, though, also is a lot of scientists, myself included, back in the day, it's like, wow, this is such a cool technology. Of course, my partner organization, wants to license it, and I'll let them figure out how to move it the rest of the way. But that turned out not to work. They're happy to take that first meeting with me, less so to actually get it to world. And why is that? I got to show them how it's going to deliver value for their customers. And I have to show them how that technology can be moved into their systems. I don't necessarily need to solve all of it, but I need to develop the technology in a general component way so that it can be integrated into their system. And in particular, if I think about licensing it to different types of customers, I need to think about it really moving in different ways. And so I need to do diligence on those companies and their customers and their systems. And then what I focus on in this company is being both the ideas factory, being this leader innovative, but also heavily on how to do business development and also IP protection. This is a strategy. If you hate lawyers, this is not the strategy for you. Because what you're going to do is invest in control and orient towards collaboration. You're going to gain control through kind of those patents, trademarks, copyright, trade secrets of your innovation. And then you're going to use those control rights in the market for ideas to sell that and allow others to move it forward, while you then innovate the next thing and continue that deal process. And this is the playbook of Ray Dolby. $7 billion company, never manufactured a product. In fact, if you go to his early writings, that was a very strategic choice, because he didn't want his potential partners to think that he might then go directly to compete with him. And so, but at the same time, heavy contracts, heavy IP protections. If you cross Dolby, you are going to get the full army of lawyers in your direction. And this is kind of this classical strategy. But what does this look like at the earliest stages for kind of innovators? This is a company that came out of MIT, very cool coding that basically you can think of as making things not stick. And so their classical video was, turns out, one of the biggest problems we have in a day-to-day, other than our batteries not lasting long enough, is actually getting things like the ketchup out of the bottle, right? You just kind of have to give up on the last 20%. Well, they coded it, the bottle, and then you can go online and watch, and you can basically get all the things out of it. But it turned out, this wasn't just an application for ketchup, although many people said you should build a consumer products company. But actually, they could do it for glue, because it turns out you want glue to stick to everything but the bottle it's in. But you could also do it for like oil and gas, just very much like Dino, like a wide array. And they said, actually, that's what we want to focus on, is innovating these coatings and then moving it to different partners to actually, where their specialty, where they're a consumer products company, they have that know-how, they have that relationship with the company or the oil and gas. And so that meant at the earliest stages of them moving that forward, what is that first 18 months? It was about really working on that intellectual property, really understanding what technology transfer looked like, and really understanding your potential partners. What is their company dynamics? What are their pain points that they have? Understanding the language that they speak, and understanding how then your solution might alleviate some of their pain points. And then moving into that partnership model with trusted folks on campus that really, that was their wheelhouse. They knew how to structure the IP, but also those really complex deals. There are people who just, that's their know-how, is how to move that. And so from the earliest stages, that's what they prioritize. And now have moved this technology into a number of different applications, from Elmer Glue, their first customer, to oil and gas, and continue to innovate in this space. Now, in a different dimension, focusing on execution and competition, is disruption strategy. This is kind of the classical one we think about often, or is in the press when we think about entrepreneurship. But actually, it's not the most common. It's just one of the mix. But the idea here is that kind of creative destruction, where we're going to discover value for new users with this, and we're going to have our system level innovation. It's not going to plug into someone else's system. We're going to build out that system to create new value. And so we as a company have to basically have everything soup to nuts. And we're leveraging this new technology, this emerging technology, with the idea that it's going to improve a lot and really allow us to build out a lot more value for customers. And so what the idea here is that you focus on customers who right now are being poorly served by the big incumbents, the existing companies. And you start with them, but then you iterate and experiment with them to create more and more value, so that ultimately, when you have figured out how to scale up everything, and you know how to do this technology and know how to match it for customer needs, that now you're head-to-head with the customer. It's often called the puppy dog strategy, because at the early days, you just say, I'm just happy with this little niche customer group over here. Big pharma, don't worry about me. And then you slowly build up such that by the time you're head-to-head, you're a Rottweiler. Yeah, I didn't promise the jokes would be funny, right? And so this is a strategy, and what does this look like at the earliest stages? Is that this is a company also out of MIT, which is, this idea that like our hiking gear, our gym gear really meets the demands of the future of our day by using these great textiles. But our professional wear hasn't really been innovated as much. And yet we're in our professional wear, 10, 12 hours a day, we're taking the train, we're biking in it. Why doesn't it meet the demands? And so they took some very cool fabric technologies and they said, how can we actually make that into dress shirts? And that seems like an easy transition until you try to make it. So that first shirt that they show, actually it went to the elbow, one arm went to the elbow. When they tried to first manufacture it, it broke all the machines of the people that made the dress shirts, and they were like, never come back to us. You broke all of our equipment. But this is a strategy that is premised on learning and execution. So what they did is they worked to figure out how to actually manufacture this. And they worked with who are the customers that really are being poorly served right now in the professional wear, iterating slowly with the idea that now they would have created a mainstream category. This is a disruption strategy. On the other hand, though, is saying we could focus on that collaboration and execution, but instead of with the intention of competing against, big dress shirt, we could instead think about working with big dress shirt. And this is the value chain strategy. Exactly.
Big dress shirt was pretty.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Brooks Brothers, I'm coming for you. And the idea here is that what you're going to do is you're going to work with this partner, with their relationship with their customer, their expertise. But that means what you're doing is you're working with them to create more value for their customers. You're not going and focusing on these other customers. But you need to understand then who their customers are and what are the dimensions of value that they care about. Not number 10 on the list, but number 1 through 3. And then you got to think about how you develop that technology in a way that interfaces with their systems. They're not re-architecting their system to add this additional piece of value. And then you're going to really collaboratively work on that. And you're going to basically own that one slice of that value chain, never touching the final customer and being best in class in that. So that even your partner doesn't want to copy. And so what is an example of this is Foxconn. Best in class at high precision manufacturing, right? They serve everyone, they own that slice, but they don't touch the end consumer of Apple's customers or others. But what they do is they focus on really getting ahead and staying ahead, working with these collaborators and moving their technology forward such that they continue to be best in class. And an example of this is BioBot. BioBot had this innovation where they could basically measure everything in sewage, 4,000 different materials in sewage, which, to each their own. Originally they said, wow, okay, 4,000 different, things, maybe we should go to an IP strategy and license this out to different folks. And then they were like, okay, we got to focus. We want to build a company. We want to think about how to move this forward. And in the United States, one challenge that we have is we have an opioid epidemic. And the challenge of actually working to solve the opioid epidemic is it's often hard to know, leading indicators of when things are getting bad until people are dying. But what if you could measure that in the sewage system? You would see people's use beforehand or as it's going on, and then put resources there to help combat as different regions have this challenge. And they understood that this was a big problem for communities across the country. And that this was number 5 on communities' lists. And so what they did is they reached out to those companies and they said, okay, we need, how about we work with you? And so they found a few communities that were willing to do pilot studies. And then they could prove out that this could measure it. But it meant that they needed a lot of resources from the university to help build these collaborations. Because a lot of these, just like any big company, they're like, oh yeah, I've seen a lot of startups with their ideas, but can they execute? Can they move this? Can they professionalize? And so the university was this incredible resource to not only help make those connections, but professionalize the firm in the direction that really worked for Flow. And so this was paramount in them proving that they could create value for the cities by giving this leading indicator of opioids. And this was the foundation for that when the COVID pandemic started, they could then shift to measuring COVID and wastewater. And they had this proven capability of collaborating with regions that many regions then scaled up and used this. And this is a value chain strategy, but it really requires really understanding and working integratively with your partner organization. And then the last strategy for startups is an architectural strategy. So all of these are roughly equally common. This is a strategy that is focused on architecting an entirely new value chain and delivering new values to new users by leveraging a general system innovation. It is the most ambitious, and it often requires the most resources at the earliest stages. And so we often see this as platform technologies, where you're integrating, so we can think of open table. And we're architecting this new value chain, coordinating with many partners to create this compelling value, but we're going to control a core that allows us to really own that relationship across many partners and how that ecosystem, the rules of how that ecosystem is going to engage. And so an example of this is just to go back to PillPack. When PillPack decided to compete, they decided to build out this entirely new value chain and do online sales, but also a new way about how these different systems. And if they had gone kind of a different route of saying, we're actually going to collaborate with with pharmacies, they might have focused on the earliest stages on consumer innovations or doing pilots with consumers. But because they went this other route to really architect another strategy, it meant at the earliest stages, they had very different priorities. Really building out that regulatory know-how and licenses, but also building out their technology solution at scale. It also meant they had to make a very thoughtful decision about which investors they would engage with and what they were looking for in different partners, because they needed people that were understood this was a long-term play. This wasn't going to realize value in the short term. It was going to require a lot of commitments, but this was a long-term. And so interestingly, then they got investment and sought investment from, in fact, biotech companies, because they understood, those companies understood regulatory dimensions, maybe not this specific one, but they understood how to understand and work through regulations. They also understood big investments and patient timelines align with their strategy. And so as you can see, just as wrapping up, these different strategies involve different evolutions of the same technology, a different focus on experimentation, learning, and competitive advantage over time, and different opportunities and risks that you're managing, particularly as you think about how and who and the nature of your relationships with different corporate partners, and different ways in which you're going to engage different university ecosystems at that earliest stage to help you get moving. And so, these early choices then really shape not only your early priorities, but what success looks like. And so just as we wrap up, the question then is how to think about choice. How do we choose then if I basically have now spent 40 minutes telling you, well, the earliest stage you need to know. And so, just at a high level, and I'm happy to talk kind of offline with folks, have a process. And part of this is to do as much commitment-free learning as you can in the earliest stages. And oftentimes that's a lot of just understanding what these different paths will look like with folks that have built it and understanding the different customers and what those different technology choices might look like. And then we say that actually you should be able to identify at least two viable paths forward. Of what would this look like as an IP strategy? What would this look like as a value chain strategy? And only then have you earned the right to say, then I should choose. But how do you choose when still those are uncertain with different potential payoffs? And that's what it comes back to you. What kind of company do you want to build? What do you want to be doing day in and day out? Do you want to be talking with the lawyers? Do you want to be working in a collaborative way with a particular partner? And for Dina, this was front and center. So she kind of worked through this process and then making a choice. And a big part of that choice was, who do I want to work with? And for her, that was healthcare. And what do I want to build this? And so she moved the company now from wearables to invisibles. And what she did, in the pandemic, it turned out we want to see, patients without going in the room. Now we have a solution. And now she's continued to build that out in a number of research orientations in collaboration with healthcare institutes, as well as hospitals. And so this is what strategy for startups is. It's really about building out the frameworks and tools to help you choose among alternative paths for an idea and your company. So thank you guys so much, being an engaging audience and laughing at my jokes.